As I'm sure a lot of you know, right now indie games are kind of popping off compared to AAA games, and I feel like that's mostly because a lot of indie game developers tend to be small teams of very passionate people, whereas a lot of large companies are kind of just in it for profit. And I feel like a really great example of that is a game that I've been playing recently called FlyKnight. So FlyKnight is kind of like almost like a parody on Runescape and Souls-like games. It's essentially a first-person dungeon crawler game, and it's very RuneScape-esque. This is the first game I've ever seen to do this. Basically, they've limited like the frame rate of a lot of the like movements in the game to be kind of like what you'd expect if you played, RuneScape way back in the day, with like very few frames per animation. And normally I'm the type of person who I don't really care about graphics that much, but one thing I do care a lot about is high frame rates. But in this game, it just works. Like, it worked to have like a lower frame rate. The highest frame rate you can have in the game, I think, is 60, and that doesn't even apply to like your animations. Your animations are still only a few frames, and it just works. It doesn't look like amazing, but it works from a gameplay standpoint, and I've never seen a game do that before. I feel like indie games often capture the essence of nostalgia, and they also are able to introduce a lot of mechanics that aren't really seen in a lot of other games. And this is great because it tends to appeal to a lot of modern players, and I think FlyKnight is a really great example of this, since it offers a first-person dungeon crawling experience that is very similar to a lot of Souls-like games. Similar to Elden Ring, there's healing potions, and I know a lot of the older Souls-like games kind of had like the whole campfire checkpoint thing, and that's also a feature in this game. It even has features like a character creator, which I thought was kind of funny. I mean, I remember the first thing that I did in the game was laugh with my friend about how a game about flies going through a dungeon trying to get their wings back had a character creator. And granted, it is a very simple character creator. It's also kind of funny though that a game this simple would have something like that. I mean, I guess it does make sense. It's just kind of funny, I guess. And I thought another cool feature too is the fact that it has co-op. Like, I mean, that's not that like groundbreaking. Obviously, a lot of games have co-op nowadays, but it's just a cool addition that the game didn't really have to do, that I think really makes the game better. I mean, they even took the time to balance out the multiplayer. Like, for example, every time you go to a campfire, you get your healing flasks recharged, you get all your health back, all that stuff. Let's say your friend goes down, right? Instead of them just dying for that entire section, you're able to go back to them and revive them, but it costs you one of your 4 flasks. And flasks can be pretty useful considering the fact that one flask will heal you like half your health. So similar to games like Elden Ring, you kind of have to do a lot of like healing management, and make sure you're not using too much healing, and it really pushes you to learn the movesets of the characters and the bosses, so that way you're not running out of flasks and then dying. It can also be a little bit punishing too, because every time you go to a campfire and you have to rest at a campfire, it resets all of the enemies, not just in the section you're currently at, but also in the sections behind you. So that allows you to kind of go back and farm for gear, but it also makes it so if you progress forward and then you rest at a campfire and you decide you want to go back for something, you have to go through and fight all of those enemies again. So the game can be a bit challenging. Personally, I don't feel like it's nearly as hard as games like Elden Ring. The only time I even died, for the most part, I think was from falling, just by trying to like do parkour, or like being kicked over by an enemy and then falling into a pit of water or something like that. That's really the only time I've died. Granted, near the end I did kind of run through a lot of enemies, because at the end it does kind of spam you a bit, but for the most part it's kind of hard to, I wouldn't say hard to die, but I went through my first entire run without even knowing you could kick in the game, like in order to knock enemies over. I didn't even know I could do that. It took me like halfway through that run to even realize that you could like parry with the shield or with a weapon. I thought you could only block with it, and if you had to block at like the right time, but it's actually a way to parry attacks by blocking and then doing it like a melee attack or pressing left click, and that'll allow you to actually parry attacks and reflect them. I didn't even know I could do that for my first run. I mean, the game isn't incredibly hard, but it definitely is a little bit difficult. But I think it's like fun difficult. Like, it's not too hard, it's also not too easy. I think one of the most important features about the game is the fact that your stamina is pretty low. There's definitely a lot of times throughout the game where I felt like the devs should add more stamina or give you more maximum stamina or something like that, because I personally ran a very light build, because weight is a big deal in the game. If you like holding too many things or you have too many things equipped, it'll make it so you have less stamina. Basically, your stamina recharges lower and it makes it easier for you to get knocked over. Even running a light build, I felt like stamina was just constantly gone. And I know that's kind of like a thing of like Souls-like games, is, you know, the stamina bar being a big deal, but in Elden Ring it seemed perfect in Elden Ring, honestly. But in this game it seems like your stamina is just always slightly lower than what it should be, and I think that's the biggest drawback, is that stamina can be a bit annoying in this game, but it does also make it a little bit more challenging. So with more stamina, it would definitely make it maybe a little bit too easy, but it's also to the point where stamina is so low that it's kind of annoying almost, because you can't run for very long. And God forbid, if you run a heavy build, you're basically just screwed. I mean, you could run for a few seconds and it's just a pain. There's also a really cool mechanic that they have in the game, which is like a limb-based combat system, which, I mean, I have seen in other games before, kind of like Dead Space. Basically, you're able to, like, every part of an enemy has like its own hitbox, right? Its own health pool, all that kind of stuff. So you can like chop off an arm of like a fly, or you can chop off, you know, the arm that's carrying a shield, or chop off a leg and then they'll crawl, or even their head. Like, one thing that I've had happen a lot is I'll chop off the enemy's head and they'll still live to keep fighting you. They'll just be slowly bleeding out. The first time that happened to me, it completely caught me off guard, because I'm like, what the hell? I didn't expect to chop off a guy's head and then him still be able to come at me. The retro aesthetic of the game I didn't think I would like it at first, but it kind of adds that like old school feel, and it's kind of nice actually. It's kind of refreshing to, I mean, obviously I wasn't alive back in the day when RuneScape was like huge, but I can appreciate going back to the roots of gaming. I have played a fair few retro games when I was a kid, and it does feel kind of nice to go back to that like retro style of graphics. It's also nice for once to play like a dungeon crawler that isn't like procedurally generated, because a lot of games nowadays use like random generation. Although it is nice because it adds a lot of replayability, I think one nice thing about this game is the fact that the environment kind of just blends together, and it feels like it was made by another person, and that's just something you don't get in a lot of games nowadays. Everything kind of feels like robotic and AI generated, whereas in this game, the handcrafted like world feels it just feels right. You know, it just feels like that's how it should be. It's hard to explain, but it's really cool to kind of get that like handcrafted experience, because this actually is my first like dungeon crawler game. I guess like I have played Elden Ring, but I guess that kind of is a dungeon crawler in some aspects, but like this game was like full on dungeon crawler, and I thought it was a lot of fun personally. And the best part about it is the game is only like $5, so you can pick this game up for super cheap and, you know, enjoy it. I think it took me like 3 hours. It was like 3.2 hours for my first run, and that was playing with a friend who wasn't exactly the greatest at games like this. I definitely think for most people it'll probably be about a 3-hour playthrough, which, you know, 3 hours for a $5 game, that is kind of a little bit low. I think, in my opinion, for every dollar you spend, that should be an hour of enjoyment. But I did see that the devs were talking about adding things like a new game plus and a randomizer mode. So once those things come out, absolutely. I mean, that's probably going to be about 9 hours of content total for $5. So right now, 3 hours for $5, definitely a little bit low, but those 3 hours are like, the game is like a perfect length. It's not too long, and it's also not too short. It's just perfect, I think. So for $5, it's definitely worth it. I mean, it's a lot of fun. You can play it in an afternoon with some of your friends. You know, $20 between 4 people. You know, you and 3 other friends can all play the game together and, you know, enjoy it for an afternoon. So definitely recommend the game. There are some things that I know the devs want to update about the game. They said it kind of came out a little bit half-baked, and you can definitely tell that a little bit. There are some things that feel like they weren't fully implemented, like magic, for example, is not exactly great. It's pretty useless. I've tried like most of the spells, I feel like, and not one of them feel even remotely useful. Some of the weapons are kind of unbalanced, which, I mean, it is to be expected from an indie game. And like I said before, the stamina is a bit of an issue, but overall, for $5, it's a fun game, and it's really cool to be brought back to like the whole retro style of games. So If you're looking for a cheap game, I highly recommend this. So yeah, that's going to do it for today, guys. I hope you all have a good one. Peace out.